It's press conference day ahead of what is obviously the most important game of our lives this weekend as Arsenal take on Bournemouth at the Emirates Stadium. In all seriousness, though, there is some importantness to this game that cannot be ignored, and there's greater footballing context to talk about today in today's Arsenal News Show. Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk. Back again with you guys and girls from that episode of what is the Arsenal News Show. Joining us every single morning at 8 a.m. UK time. Thank you so much as always for tuning in and joining me. It is greatly appreciated. I hope you're doing good. I hope you're doing well. I hope you've had a good week. You've made it to Friday, which of course means the weekend is here and it's time, of course, for some more relaxation and some distraction, of course, as well from Arsenal's frustrating week so far. Of course, I think we can all agree that it's not gone the way that we wanted to. Hopefully things can still be turned around next week in Paris. But Arsenal have got some preparation to do before that, including their game against Bournemouth this weekend, with this weekend being an opportunity to secure Champions League qualification for next season. Arsenal can guarantee that if results are to go their way this weekend. But good morning to all of you joining us in the chat box. Really appreciate you all doing, or rather, hope that you're doing well. And I really appreciate all of you being here. Very much appreciate you all. Jumping in this morning, Maximius, Matt G, Black Shine, Evan, we've got Louis, we've got Temi and Answer, Stevie, Grantley Poos and Temi and Answer. Going back over people now. Paul, James, we've got Tom, we've got Boss Booler and Natty, we've got Glenn and Brian, we've got Claire and Dave. Good morning to you all. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. Greatly appreciate you being here. Greatly appreciate you listening. Let's, though, without further ado, jump to a roundup of yesterday's European action. We had the UEFA Conference League semi-final first legs. Real Betis with a narrow 2-1 win over Fiorentina. That game is finally poised. And then, unsurprisingly, Chelsea absolutely battered Djurgården 4-1 in the semi-finals of the competition. It looks at the moment like it could be a Betis-Chelsea final, but Fiorentina may indeed come back to reach what would be, their third UEFA Conference League final, crazily enough. Anyway, the results from the semi-finals of the Europa League look to be setting up an all-English Europa League final. The two teams, of course, that look set to finish well inside the bottom half of the Premier League table look to be one of the two teams that will lift the Europa League, which seems so backwards, doesn't it? Imagine finishing like 15th or 16th in the Premier League table and still getting Champions League qualification. It shouldn't be that surprising that this has happened, though, because, of course, this is the first year where Champions League clubs have not dropped into the Europa League, which, of course, has made the Europa League a less prestigious competition, but it has meant that teams that are further down their respective tables and further down the European pecking order, of course, can now get further on in the competition. So for those asking, how is it that these teams have got further? Well, it's because those Champions League clubs have not dropped in this season. That's why the Europa League is much weaker. That's why it's much simpler for these teams to reach the latter stages. And these changes to European competition, I think, will create a scenario where this becomes the regularity. While you've got Luis Enrique sitting there asking whether the Premier League is the best league in the world, well, if you look at the results across other European competitions with Spurs and Man United and Chelsea, who sit, where they sit in respective league positions, and they've gone as high as they can in these other European competitions, it will speak volumes. I imagine, of course, next season you've got teams like Nottingham Forest, Aston Villa that will be in those competitions as well. Maybe Fulham, but it looks unlikely. The reality is, of course, that it will be another English team again, I imagine, that gets to the later stages of these competitions also. So, yeah, that is the reality of these European kind of second and third tier competitions, as is the case. But yes, disappointing, I think, Athletic Club. Of course, they did go down to 10 men in the first half, which was always a bit of a death sentence, unfortunately, for that leg. But Nico Williams was very isolated in that game, was barely given any service, was forced to do quite a lot of the work on his own, which obviously he struggled to do. He looks like a player that's desperate to get into a much better team, which I think obviously Arsenal would be a great option for him. Moving forwards, though, and to the Premier League, as mentioned and highlighted there, Nottingham Forest have dropped points, giving the opportunity, of course, for Arsenal to lock in their Champions League qualification for next season. This weekend, should either of Nottingham Forest or Chelsea lose their respective games, Nottingham Forest are away to Palace, Chelsea are at home to Liverpool. Should either of those two teams lose at the weekend and Arsenal beat Bournemouth at home, they will confirm Champions League football for next season, based upon those results that have now happened. You have to have a look at the recent form of Nottingham Forest. It has fallen off a cliff. They've lost 3 of their last 4 games. Had they have won those 3 games, they'd actually be above Arsenal right now. But that is just the way that football goes. They lost to Villa, they lost at home to Everton, and now they've lost at home to Brentford. And it's really, really affected how likely it is now that they will qualify for the Champions League. European football still very much on the cards, but Champions League football is suddenly looking rather unlikely. And they've got that away trip to Palace now as well, which is far from easy. They've got a very, very difficult end to the season, it seems, for Forest, and they've got Chelsea on the final day. That seems to be a huge game all of a sudden for them to try and qualify for those top European places. But Arsenal can qualify for the Champions League if they win and either of Forest or Chelsea lose this weekend. The under-16s, Arsenal's under-16s have lifted the 24-25 Premier League Cup for the first time. They beat Chelsea in the final 3-1. A brilliant, of course, performance for them and showing also the talent that's coming out from the youth ranks. Bear in mind that this is a team that, of course, could field Max Dowman if it wanted to. The under-16s, he's currently with the under-18s right now, the 15-year-old. But, very impressive. Great achievement. Fantastic stuff. And they've lifted the trophy for the first time in their history, which is obviously a massive accomplishment. So well done to them. Moving into the highlights of today, though, we must first talk about the rumours surrounding PSG forward Ousmane Dembele. The player was, of course, taken off in the game against Arsenal with a muscular issue. There is lots of rumours swirling around French reporting right now. However, what we do know is that PSG are giving very little away. There's been some reports in France suggesting it could be that he misses the second leg because of this minor muscle issue that we usually need at least over a week of recovery before returning. But because of the magnitude of the game, I still think it would be surprising if he did indeed miss the match. A lot of mind games potentially going on here. But it's worth pointing out that the injury that has been suggested is an injury that usually does take longer than a week to recover from. But again, because of the magnitude of this game, that may end up changing. So worth bearing that in mind. And we'll update you as soon as we get any further confirmation on that front, of course. But today is Mikel Arteta's press conference. He's set to face the media ahead of the game against Bournemouth on Saturday. That's a 5:30 kickoff in the afternoon. He'll be asked questions, of course, I think, about the fallout from the game against PSG. He'll be asked about the latest team news, including the likes of Ricardo Calafiori, Kai Havertz. Both of them were not spotted in the open training session for the broadcast media that were in attendance at the weekend, or rather yesterday morning. So there isn't really an expectation that will change. There is a Premier League game tonight. Man City take on Wolves, which is a really interesting game, actually, because Wolves are in some really, really good form. Man City, of course, are close to welcoming back Erling Haaland and Rodri to the ranks. They could have both of them ready for the FA Cup final. But Mikel Arteta will be talking about that game against Bournemouth that takes place at 5:30 on Saturday. Other Premier League games, 12:30, Aston Villa against Fulham, 3 o'clock, Everton against Ipswich, and Leicester against Southampton, the deadest game of the Premier League history. And we'll talk more about the further weekend games later on, other than that Chelsea-Liverpool game, which does have an impact, of course, on Arsenal. That Nottingham Forest game takes place on Monday night. PSG, if you want to know when they're in action this weekend as well. They're playing Strasbourg this weekend. Away from home, 4 o'clock kickoff on Saturday. So they get an hour and a half extra rest compared to Arsenal, but they are away from home this weekend, PSG, as opposed to Arsenal's game at home also. So that's where we're at. We'll hear from Arteta later. If you want to stay up to date with that press conference, of course, I'll be doing the live blog over on the Football.London website. You can catch every single word of the transcript from that presser as well, of the broadcast section in our Every Word piece that goes out around half an hour after the press conference is finished. So make sure you look out for that on the Football.London website. We're going to go to part 2 now, your questions and more, right after this. Okay, this is part 2 of the show where we're going to be jumping into the chat box and tackling some of your questions. So please do throw them in now and use a capital Q. It does help them stand out in the chat. So now's the time to chuck them in. Let's go to Maximus. Dembele has a history of leg muscle injuries, doesn't he? There was a meme when he was at Barca. Every time he returned from injuries, he would see new faces in the first team squad. He has had a serious history when it comes to injuries. Unfortunately for him, he has been unable to kind of shake those issues. The amount of time that he's been playing for Dortmund or Barca, and of course now PSG. It was one of the reasons why I think Barca were happy to kind of move Dembele on, if you like, because they had so many injury issues with him that in the end they were like, fine, we're happy to let him go. But he has turned out to be brilliant. Also, Lamine Yamal. I know yesterday, I think I said the same thing. I think I said Lamine Yamal on yesterday's show, and I had a comment in the chat box saying, Tom, it's not Lamine Yamal, it's Lamine Yamal. And do forgive me, that was something I just Freudian slip, completely didn't. And then this morning I've done it again because I was thinking so hard about it yesterday. Lamine Yamal. So make sure you get that right. Mr. Robbo says, still hurting today after Tuesday and have almost no confidence before tomorrow, especially the demoralising situation after the Europa League and the UEFA Conference League games. Rough times. I mean, these are obviously second-tier competitions. Yes, if you're in them, you want to win them. I'm just not really that bothered. I mean, the stature of those competitions has obviously been downgraded quite considerably after the European changes, has made those competitions incredibly simple to win for particularly English clubs. So in these days, if you're in those competitions and you're a Premier League club, it's almost an expectation to win them. Whereas before, you were going up against some very decent sides, of course, and getting to I mean, Arsenal, when they got there, they obviously played a very different Chelsea side than the Chelsea side that we have today. You look at some of the winners of those competitions, of course, in recent seasons. It is night and day, really, when it comes to kind of how the competition has changed. Now we're seeing teams that are sitting 15th, 16th in the Premier League getting to the semi-finals and looking like the final of the competition as well. Josh says, off topic, Tom, what's your favourite movie? I don't really have like a single one. I just have a collection of films that I would say are my favourite. I'll come back to you. Because as I say, I don't have like a specific one that stands out above every single one, but I'll think about it. Giorgio says, hi, Tom. Do you think all the negative loser talk is a cultural thing with our club because of the last few years? We conceded one goal and heads down. I think it's just social media, Giorgio, I think actually if you speak to the majority of fans aren't really, posting comments online, and that's not really the mindset. I think it's more of kind of a feedback loop of kind of negative spiraling on social media. Chris says, Tom, do you think Jack Wilshere will get the Norwich job on a permanent basis? I've absolutely no idea, Chris, to be honest. I have no idea if he will get that job. I have no idea of the context of Norwich or what they're aiming for, or how impressive he is and how he has been, because I haven't been paying too much attention to it. So I have no idea, but he'd certainly be aiming to do that, you would think. Kirill says, hi, Tom. How long should Arteta play Partey for on Sunday, not risking him missing the PSG return? I think Partey should start. If you have a look at Partey's kind of history of games, when he misses matches, he tends to have not the best performance when he comes back. He missed the game against Ipswich. He didn't have his best game against Crystal Palace. Obviously, he missed the PSG game. I think he needs to play in this Bournemouth game just to kind of get up to speed again. I think it's important that he plays, but of course, bringing him off in the second half is probably quite important to do. Ashley says, Rice is a maverick and has too much energy to be a 6. Maybe in 3 years' time when he loses some of his pace. But for now, he is an 8. Arteta wants his 6 be a Partey or Zubimendi to beat a 2-man press and then use the one pass to beat 2 players at once. I don't disagree. Diaz says, imagining all the big 6 winning a trophy except us and Man United and Tottenham. Obviously, there would be absolute uproar were that to happen. Newcastle have won a trophy. Man City look like they're going to win a trophy. Chelsea look like they're going to win a trophy. Forest, Villa, of course, those 2 won't. But top 5, Arsenal could be the only team not to lift a trophy in the top 5. And one of Spurs and United, of course, look to. Chelsea's trophy, of course, is a bit of a comedy trophy, a Mickey Mouse tournament. We all know that. and the Europa League as well is kind of going that way as well. But I get the sentiment. It is frustrating. But when you're in the biggest competitions, they are much, much harder to win. Claire says, will you be watching Celebrity Traitors? Absolutely. Of course I will. Maximus says, Tom, in the match last night, why was the double jeopardy rule not implemented? Penalty and red cards. Again, you're asking me about refereeing decisions like I have any understanding of how these referees come to make their decisions these days. I have zero idea how these referees come to make the decisions they make anymore. I've stopped trying to interpret them. I've stopped trying to analyze them. I've stopped trying to second guess them. It's ridiculous. Paul says, is Nico Williams an upgrade or competitor for Martinelli? I think we've discussed this before, obviously. When you have a look at kind of Nico Williams' individual numbers, they are considerably better than Martinelli in a number of areas, be that offensively, be that defensively, be that on the ball, off the ball, creatively. He is looking far better in a team where obviously he's not playing for Arsenal. He's playing for Athletic Club, who are losing 3-0 at home to Man United. So that's also worth pointing out. Ian says, how important is the Bournemouth game after to win for us? A good performance is important before PSG's second leg. One can't switch off and on like that. PSG is a tough team. I think it is important. Yes, it's a bit of a distraction. Yes, it's not the focus. Yes, it's still important in terms of Arsenal's league finish to get those 3 points. But ultimately, it's going to be very difficult not to have minds elsewhere. Mira says, does anyone see other TIFOs now, either from social media or games, and get angry all over again because of our pathetic attempt on Tuesday? I'm already past the result, but the TIFO still haunts me. It was really bad. Like, there's not really any. I think what was so bad about the TIFO is how out of place it looked, how poorly it was executed. Obviously, like the cannon itself can work, but I think it needs to be like the fact there was no like red and white around the stadium. I found that was odd. I thought that was going to happen. It didn't, and in the end, it just looked pretty bad. Like the execution of it was poor, and it ended up turning into a bit of a meme, which is a shame because it could have been very good. But yeah, it's the same. It's a shame. Jack says, do you think they should change the reward for winning the Europa League? Yeah, I think so. I guess they won't, because obviously the Europa League needs to have that to have any kind of, what's the word, relevance, I guess. But yeah, I would be definitely in favour of that. It's easy to say that as a team that qualify for the Champions League these days, but yeah. Mars Cannon says, if Spurs win a trophy before us, I can imagine what people will say, but yeah, the Europa League has become a joke. You're going to have to, it looks like one of Man United or Spurs are going to lift that trophy this season. You're going to have to it's going to have to be, you're going to have to deal with that. It's disastrous for whoever doesn't win it, because neither of them will have European. Basically, the winner of that will get Champions League. The loser of that gets no European football next season. It could be a defining moment in both of those clubs' histories. It really, really could. So maybe enjoy the fallout for the loser rather than worry about the winger. Cyrus says, Tom, did you watch Nico when he's yesterday? Paying him £400,000 per week is like, I don't know who's paying him £400,000 a week, Cyrus. Certainly not Arsenal, that's for sure. His output doesn't match that amount. I don't know where £400,000 a week's come from, to be honest, mate. SN says, Tom, do you still give attention to the Premier League games? Personally, I want to destroy Newcastle as they've humiliated us. Oh, I would love to get one over them and make it difficult for them to qualify, of course. Yes, absolutely. There should be motivation there. And of course, that game will come after our European game, so we can have more focus on that. Yes, we'll have a final coming up, but I think for me, that's neither here nor there. We need to be beating Newcastle, getting that revenge. Teo says, our trophy density in Wenger's first years was quite decent. We should strive to pick up a couple of the Mickey Mouse Cups to reconnect with the trophy winning culture. I mean, we aren't really in the Mickey Mouse Cup tournaments, though, Teo, are we? We're not in them. We're in the Champions League now, not either of those two tournaments. Let's go to Football Win. Says, wonder if you thought the same when Arsenal were in the Europa League. For Arsenal winning the Europa League, it was never actually about the trophy. It was actually always going to be about the qualification to the Champions League. That was what was important. That was what was important about winning the Europa League. It was the prize that came with it. It wasn't the actual trophy in itself. I think teams that win the Europa League or win the Conference League and win and sing the song Champions of Europe, it's embarrassing. West Ham did it, obviously, when they won the Conference League. it's embarrassing. Look what good winning the Europa Conference League has done to West Ham. They're lucky that they've got teams below them that are slightly worse, and they're not in fear of relegation this season. So I'm not swapping places. Certainly I wouldn't swap my season with either of Man United's or Spurs. Of course, I wouldn't. You'd be absolutely mental to do that. Ian says, but why this much talk about the Tifo? On the pitch, the performance was poor. Maybe the way I don't think... I disagree with this point. The idea of it being poor. This idea that the performance overall was poor. I just don't agree with. The first 15 minutes was a little frustrating. Don't get me wrong. It was really, really frustrating. And I don't really understand why we were in that situation and how that happened. But we're in a weird scenario, of course, with that. We're in a weird scenario that we find ourselves one down, all the energy is gone, everything about the game has dissipated, and I'm not quite sure why that happened. But overall, the performance was not poor. The performance at the start was, but that game could have gone either way. Arsenal could have won that game. We created big chances in that match. I'm not quite sure how we get onto the side of it being poor in the end, because it wasn't. Overall, the performance was not poor. PSG were also brilliant. Like there's no doubt. And sometimes you have to you have to doff your cap to the opposition at times. Sometimes you have to look at what they've done and say they were brilliant. We played not to our best, but at the end of the day, PSG were just excellent, just absolutely brilliant. And sometimes you just have to doff your cap to them. And we need to perform better in the second leg if we are to win. But we had, obviously, pieces missing. We had chances that went by, but we weren't dominated for the whole game. There were phases of play where PSG had more of the ball. There were phases where we had more of the ball. And I agree with Maximius as well. Donnarumma had one of his best days between the sticks, So I'm not in agreement that the performance was poor. I think that's not sensationalist, but the term of sensationalist in a negative sense. So yeah, for me, I'd put myself in that category of saying I don't think the performance was poor, but I would certainly turn around and say that we need to do more, if we're going to win the second leg. Georgia says, the way people are talking, you think that we lost 4-0. We got dominated for like 20 minutes. Maybe, yeah, we had a similar number of shots and kept them pretty quiet for long periods. As I say, it was an even game. PSG played brilliantly. The game overall was relatively even. But the start and end, if you you take 10 minutes either side off the game, the 70 minutes in between, Arsenal were more than competitive with PSG. But unfortunately, they started and ended the game pretty poorly. Zek says, I hope, or Zeke maybe says, I hope Raya's preparing for penalties. Me too, mate. I really, really hope that it is, because there could be a scenario where that happens. There could be a scenario where we find ourselves in a position where we are looking rather worryingly, if you like, at that situation. And sincerely, I hope that we aren't dealing with that. But there is a very good scenario that we might end up dealing with that. So let's wait and see. Amma says, Arteta's tactical change was to put Miles Lewis-Skelly more centrally and push Rice and Moreno forward, which forced them back as well. Just on this tactical side of things, I put a tweet out yesterday on the TGT account. I don't know if you saw it, if you're following it. That's the Gooner Talk TV on X. Recently, I've kind of been able to get a little bit more exposure to people who are actually involved in football analytics, and people that actually are involved in kind of teams that they work out the tactics, they analyze players, they analyze potential transfer targets, and ultimately what we found is that, and what I've found is that tactical videos where you use arrows and circles and you try to make sense of what's going on, unless you are an analyst, unless you are in the sport, unless you are involved in a club of some sort, and not just me being a content creator online and even, a journalist covering those sort of things. I look back at the videos that we've done in the past, the videos where we did kind of those tactical circles and arrows and kind of looking at lineups and stuff like that and how the team structure is. And I look at it and go, and I cringe. I'll be really honest. Now that now I've seen it, now that I know it, now that I know what goes on and have certain things explained to me, just from like a goal kick, right? Like a goal kick, you think of as such a simple thing in the game. I cannot tell you how complex in this game at this level a goal kick is. It's nuts. And I so underestimated how intricate and specific tactics for even those moments are. Teams at this level have so many different scenarios for every single phase of play. Goal kicks of your own, goal kicks of your opponent, free kicks in your own half and the opposition half, a throw-in in your defensive third, a throw-in on the halfway line, an attack down the left-hand side when you got 3-on-2 or 4-on-2 or 2-on-3 or 3-on-4. It's nuts what these players have to remember and learn while also playing the game. So you won't get me here drawing up tactics lines and circles and arrows anymore. Because frankly, I just look back on those videos that I'd done in the past as so cringy now, knowing what I know, having seen what I've seen. It's crazy the level of detail. And so while I can sit there and go, he should be making this run here, or he should be doing this, not this, and he's missed out in this position, or we should be looking at this player because they do this and this guy doesn't do this, or this guy drifts left and prefers to this. That couldn't be further from the truth. We can talk the best way that we as fans, I take my journalism hat off, the best way as we as fans have the best idea about making a judgment on a player is the data. The data tells us a lot. The data can give us a lot of context. It's never going to be defining. It's never going to be concrete. And you're never going to get that from the eye test as well. Remember those classic, I prefer to watch a player and ignore all facts about them because I like them. Yeah, the eye test is a bit of a myth as well. But when it comes to the data is the only really thing that is worth having a look at, I've found. And certainly what some of the conversations I've had over the last couple of weeks or so with some people that do know their stuff. I think it's quite interesting actually now when I look back and go, oh yeah, I remember doing a tactical breakdown on Nicolas Pepe and I thought him making these runs was quite good and I thought it was going to be a good signing in the end for Arsenal. Look how that turned out. I thought this player drifted left and moved into positions that didn't necessarily suit Arsenal. It turns out doesn't matter what they do for their club in their respective league because when they join Arsenal, it's so different. Then they get coached and taught to do different things. So I'm really not inclined to be as judgmental tactically about players or transfer targets or even our own games as I was before, because while I can think about individual performances from what I've absorbed watching a game, ultimately when I'm judging things more in detail, and I'm not going to pretend to be a football analyst that works for a Premier League level club because we're just not, you're not, I'm not. So it's pointless really, isn't it? The data is what we've got. The data gives us as much context as we as us on the outside can really get. Football wins. I think there's some snobbery that's with Arsenal's recent progress. Disregarding the domestic cup shouldn't happen. They should be a supplement to the bigger two. I don't think there's snobbery at all. Arsenal have reached 2 semi-finals this season at the very minimum. They can still reach a final of that competition, of course, as well. Only a certain number of teams can win. That happens at the start of every season. And what Arsenal are right now is a club that have put themselves in a position where they are one of the more likely teams to win trophies. And that's where you can be. The snobbery comes from the entitlement of expecting to win them. That's the real snobbery surrounding Arsenal. It's the arrogance, the entitlement that Arsenal have a divine right to win anything. No football team does. That's what sport is. If anyone has a divine right or an entitlement or an expectation of a trophy, that's not sport. That's not how sport works. That's the real snobbery of sport, is those that feel that there is an entitlement to win anything. Because for Arsenal put themselves in a position with the success of the last 5 years, the progression that we've seen over these last 5 years to put us back into the title race, put us back into the Champions League latter stages, the latter stages of the League Cup, of course, as well, is that we're one of the more likely teams that can lift the trophy. You know, there are anomalies, of course. Man United are definitely an outlier, that's for sure. But when it comes to competitiveness, Arsenal are certainly one of the most competitive teams in Europe right now and have been on that track for quite some time. Someone says, hi, Tom, do you think that Waneri should start for PSG? I'd rather he didn't start for PSG. I'd rather he played for us, to be honest, someone. But if you meant in the PSG game due to his pace that Odegaard doesn't have. This could help in case things go into extra time. Maybe. I'm really on the side of maybe with this because there's no doubt in that Odegaard is not in a good place. Like form-wise, he's just not in a good place. We know that. I don't really understand how we've got here other than thinking about the injury. That's the only evidence that we've really got is the injury, illness, having a child maybe has affected things potentially. We don't know. But I'm open to ideas, and maybe there'll be some experimentation this weekend against Bournemouth. Maybe that'll get used. Maybe Saka will play 10, Wineri on the right, give Odegaard a little bit of a break. That's something that I'm up for seeing. I'm very curious. I'm very, very curious indeed. Teo says, "What FA Cup? The FA Cup is definitely still highly desirable, and wouldn't you rather attacked it next season as if it was the Champions League in 2003? It was very good consolation for missing out on the league." Oh yeah, without a doubt. I mean, you look at the Arsenal eliminations from the FA Cup in the last 3 seasons. We've gone out to United on penalties after a game that we dominated and should have won and missed a penalty, of course, that would have seen us go through. We lost to Manchester City and we lost to Liverpool. So I'm not really that annoyed about the FA Cup eliminations. I can make sense of those FA Cup eliminations. You look at the League Cup, we've reached 2 semi-finals in the last 4 years. We've got now to the Champions League semi-final as well, and we hope still to be able to get to the final. We've progressed every single year. Every single year, the context has always gone forwards. So that's just it. Lawrence says, so why aren't we getting over the line? Maybe Arteta just ain't good enough. It's funny, isn't it? It always lands back on Arteta, despite the fact, of course, the team that he's got right now, if you look at the squad that's available to him, it shouldn't be second in the league. It shouldn't be in a Champions League semi-final, and yet it is. There's an argument that Arteta should even get Premier League Manager of the Season because of, frankly, the job that he's done with the group of players that have been available to him. It's absolutely nuts to be where we are. But yet you get comments like this suggesting that why can't we get over the line? It must be the manager. It can't be anything to do with the lack of players. It can't be anything to do with the refereeing decisions. It has to be all on the manager, despite the fact that maybe it's the manager that we're actually here and not further back. Why doesn't that ever come into the lexicon of the conversation? I don't really know. Annie says, Martinelli, besides Odegaard, who just needs therapy in his right foot, will benefit so much with the number 9 coming in and goes straight to goal. But Martinelli needs competition. Nikkei says, would you bench Odegaard for our next league game? Would this mentality hurt or heal him? I don't think he would. I don't think it would hurt him being dropped for the league game. I don't think it would change seeing something rather different being utilised and tried. I don't think it would hurt him too much. I think he recognises he's not had his strongest of seasons at all. Kirill says, Tom, do you think there is any chance of Charles Sago Jr. breaking through to the first team in the next 2 years? With my FM24, I had so many injuries I had to make in the first team, and he's done well. Sadly, I don't think so. His loans have not gone particularly well with Swansea or with Shrewsbury. They've not been particularly great. So, no, I don't think so, sadly. I think he will move on. Maybe in the summer, maybe later. Lee says, Tom, can you see Arsenal buying a player in the summer with a wow factor, a player who can get you off your feet? I think certainly the centre forward is what we're looking at for that type of player. That's what we want to see. I hope that turns out to be the guy. Football Win says, Tom, what sort of impact would removing the captaincy have on Odegaard? Only a bad one. So I wouldn't do it. And we've gone round in circles on this conversation. It's just an absolute... it's a nonsense for me. I'll be very blunt about it. It's an absolute nonsense, the idea of taking it. If you take the captaincy off and you're creating a problem, it doesn't need to be created. Billy says, personally, I feel that we are still very much in this Champions League. Yes, we were dominated. Again, I don't agree that we were dominated. We were dominated for phases of the game, but also we dominated phases of the game. So I disagree with this rhetoric. You know, they won 1-0. They could have easily have lost 3-1. We could have easily lost 3-0. It was one of those very, very good games. Lawrence saying, let's be happy we're second in another trophyless season. Lawrence being the classic person who doesn't listen. Oh no, a different opinion. It must be I have to reply in this way because I can't admit, there's a decent point. Oliver says, I'll be honest, I have no idea how to help Odegaard. I heard Amy Lawrence talk about playing him in a different position, like the left A rather than the right A, and that sounded promising. I don't know if that's the solution. I think he needs the end of the season. I think Odegaard needs the break. I think Odegaard needs the summer. I think he just needs to be able to take a step back, take a break, come back next season and get a clean slate. That's what I think it needs. Richard said, who is the next captain if Odegaard or Gabriel isn't on the pitch? Saka is our captain when Odegaard is not there. Jorginho as well is another one, but he'll be leaving, of course, in the summer. But this is personally, I feel that we are still very much in the Champions League. I think we've done that one. Someone says other managers in our position wouldn't even be making top four, let alone the Champions League semi-final. Exactly. Morgana says, I know Thierry Henry is a legend, but I'm fed up with criticisms against Arteta's tactics. People forget, like Neville, he's a failed manager. So yeah, I love Thierry Henry as a player. When I listen to him as a pundit or reflect on him as a manager, it's never been I've never had that same connection to him on that level. He'll always be the best Arsenal player for me in Arsenal's history so far. I don't really see him being overtaken, but yeah, I think that there are levels to this. Arteta has achieved things managerially that I don't think Thierry Henry ever will. And I'd go as far as saying that I'd be surprised if Thierry Henry was in a position where he won an FA Cup with a team. I just haven't seen enough from his managerial career that would tell me that that's going to be feasible. But maybe that will change. Maybe he'll prove me wrong, and I hope he does. You know, I'd love for Thierry Henry to succeed as a manager. I've just not seen enough so far to tell me that I think that will happen. But that's just maybe where I'm at with kind of his career so far on that side of things. Snake Eye says, Tom, I agree 1,000%. He needs a break, Odegaard. He has played a lot of football due to no squad depth. Taylor says Odegaard should definitely start the PSG game. He should just be subbed earlier if not being impactful. That's all. That call will be on Arteta. Louis says, could Saka overtake him if he wins us the Champions League and the league and stays for his whole career? If Saka was to stay at Arsenal for the rest of his career, win multiple leagues, win multiple Champions Leagues, then yes, of course. Of course, there's that chance that could happen. But a lot more is going to be needed from Saka to do that. Comp says, what about Arsenal's need instead of what Odegaard needs? There are better players than him. I mean, Arsenal need more, of course. But the conversation around Odegaard doesn't mean you're foregoing Arsenal, is it? We've talked at length about Arsenal needing to have competition, and I think Arsenal should go out and sign an attacking midfielder. People draw battle lines so quickly. I find it really odd. You're either Arteta in or Arteta out. You're either Odegaard captain or Odegaard not captain. I don't know why people want to do this. You know, football fandom has changed so much in the last 30 years. It used to be just about supporting your team. Now it's about having opinions. Now it's about being stuck to a mast about what you should think in the game. And I can never agree with that. It should always be about just being open to whatever, discussing views, yes, but it feels like people pin themselves to masts these days. And and if you offer up, and I think, you know, that comment from Lawrence earlier on in the chat box, was it Lawrence? I think it was. Yeah, that comment from Lawrence was the perfect example of that. Lawrence left a comment in the chat box earlier on, says, why aren't we getting over the line? Maybe Arteta just isn't good enough, and that's to get us to the promised land. We've responded with that, you know, Arteta, what he's done this season, of course, with the players available to us. We've given those reasons. And the clapback was a sarcastic, let's be happy with second. You know, that's the perfect example of how social football chat has diminished and devolved and regressed. You know, it's comments like that, which I think are perfect examples of the sad state of where football fandom is these days, unfortunately. Ian says, best player does not translate to best manager. Also, it seems to me good players who become managers, or rather become the best managers, played more in defensive or midfield positions, which is rather interesting. Raditya says, Tom, with 2 games left in the league and second place secured, should we try out the youth strikers like Keon Edwards or Harriman and Noose? Until Champions League is sorted, no. And to be honest, I would like to finish second. So, like, I think we absolutely need to finish as high up the table as we can. So I'm leaning towards no. Amat says fans are more emotional and less logical, Tom, naturally. But fans 30 years ago were still much more emotional than they were logical. I think they're just, social media has enabled kind of silliness and nonsense to fester and marinate and be celebrated at times, and in some cases be voted in. So, you know, when it looks at that level, you can kind of understand where society has kind of gone in that way. Paul says, should we be angry with Edu for not doing more to build the great squad depth? I mean, you could argue that, but Arsenal spent significant amounts of money in rebuilding the starting 11. I don't think with the 700 to 800 million that Arsenal have spent, that you can build a title-winning squad. I think you can potentially build a title-winning team, but squad is asking a lot of 700 to 800 million. You know, when you're thinking that some single players like Declan Rice are going for, you know, more than 10% of that budget over the last 5 years, that's just impossible, isn't it, to build a title-winning squad? But I think a title-winning team is feasible, but you need a lot of things to go your way. And so we need to keep investing. We need to keep signing players. We need to keep on adding further. Edu's job I'm critical of because it was left half finished. That's what I'm critical of about Edu, is that he left prematurely. He left his work unfinished and he didn't see it through. That's my criticism of Edu. I'm not critical too much about what we did because I think what he's done at Arsenal was good. Hence, look where we are. Look where we were. So, yeah, I understand there's an age thing as well. You know, I'm sure you listening that are similar to my age or older, this is not about you. This doesn't resonate with you. But you have to think about it. There'll be people listening to this show in this comment section that are of a much younger persuasion. At the start of Arteta's tenure, an 18-year-old now would have been 13. You know, Arteta's tenure has taken up more than a quarter of their lifetime. So their perception, the younger generation that have come through behind me, the generation before me, have really only known Arteta. They didn't really know what came before Arteta or appreciate living through that purgatorial awfulness that we had. Picking up FA Cups, yes, but they were kind of anomalous in themselves. Arsenal were never competitive, really. We lost out on the league to Leicester. Before that, the only real challenge we made were in the late noughties. We got to a Champions League semi-final that we were battered in against Man United. Like, for the younger generation, Arteta's tenure takes up, and this younger generation tends to be the loudest, of course, I think, as well. Thankfully, there are plenty that have a very good perspective on Arsenal as well, but they tend to be the loudest socially on media. And Arteta's tenure has taken up such a large portion of that. I think they lose the context, the generation before me, of, not all of them, but a large proportion of them, I think, lose the context of what was and what is now. And that's hard. You know, that's hard to take in. I don't think I was really footballingly conscious till I was 17. You know, until I was 17 going to my first Arsenal game, because my family weren't wealthy enough to afford to go to Arsenal before I was 17. I certainly wasn't, to go to Arsenal before I was 17. In that state, I know that my understanding of football before that age was relatively, very low. At school, you had friends, you had more of a social life. There was a brilliant, for those of you that don't know, a content creator, Andrew, aka the Ginger Fella, who was always a brilliant. I don't think he's done too much recently, but there's a great skit of his going around at the moment about being at school, which just resonates with me perfectly. We all took for granted going for school, 9 to 3 days, no responsibilities, dinner cooked for you when you got home, hopefully. Sent to school with money to get whatever you wanted, a lunch or go to the shop after school, and that you saw your mates every single day. No one had really time to delve deeply into the love of and the passion for football we can all have as adults now. And so you have to think about that for that younger generation. Arteta's tenure has taken up such a high proportion of that. The context of what came before Arteta is kind of lost. So when you see these horrible comments and these disparaging things, maybe like the one from Lawrence earlier in the chat, kind of this thing about being happy with second or happy with no trophies, they've forgotten, of course, or they don't know maybe what went before. They haven't really appreciated the rise of Arsenal over the last 5 years, where we were, where we are now. And I'm certainly not taking that for granted. Anyway, thank you so much as always for listening. Really appreciate you tuning in. It is greatly appreciated as usual. If you could drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new, that would also be very humbling indeed. I'll be back with you tomorrow morning talking about Mikel Arteta's press conference, of which I'll be in attendance for a little bit later on today around lunchtime. If you want to get all of the info from that press conference, of course, please do click on the Every Word article on the football.london website. Have an absolutely fantastic day. Enjoy yourself. Stay safe, stay well, stay happy and respectful. And as always, up the Arsenal.